Episode 1. The Wilderness that Arie and Miabirras. From afar, the forest looked serene, almost inviting. But the moment someone stepped beneath its canopy, the air tightened around them like a coiling rope. The woods felt aware, recognizing outsiders and greeting them with a quiet, watchful hostility. Locals told stories of campers who vanished without a trace. Their final messages described shadowy figures lingering at the edge of the tree line, shapes that resembled people in the dark, though some swore they crawled unnaturally on all fours. Night brought a biting cold that sank straight into the bones. Campfires sputtered weakly, as if an unseen force drained the oxygen from the air. Every sound carried too clearly. A single twig snapping felt intentional, close, and disturbingly deliberate. Maps were useless here. Trails twisted unpredictably, looping travelers back to where they began. Many believed the forest shifted when unobserved, erasing old paths and forming new ones like veins in a living creature. Survivors spoke of whispers drifting through the branches at night, soft voices repeating their names long after their companions had fallen asleep. The deeper one ventured, the more the forest transformed. Tree bark darkened to an ashy black. Thick tar-like sap dripped down the trunks. Fresh claw marks carved deep into the wood, still oozing as if made moments earlier. A constant sense of dread accompanied every step. Something unseen was always watching, studying intruders not with hunger, but with a slow, patient curiosity, as though learning what fear looked like on a human face. Episode 2. The Wilderness that Arie and Miabirras. From a distance, the forest still appeared peaceful, but those who stepped inside knew the truth instantly. The woods held memories, and it resented intruders. The deeper one ventured, the heavier the air became, as if the forest itself leaned closer to listen. Stories circulated among locals about campers who vanished after sending frantic messages, describing silent figures lurking between the trees. Some looked vaguely human. Others didn't bother pretending. Night in the wilderness felt wrong. Fires dimmed as though smothered by invisible hands, and every sound echoed with unnatural sharpness. The darkness was thick, alive, attentive. Trails bent and reshaped themselves, trapping travelers in circles and forcing panic to take root. Survivors claimed the forest wasn't merely confusing, it was shifting, breathing, reacting to their presence. Whispers carried through the branches, repeating names with eerie precision. These voices knew their targets well, speaking with a cold familiarity that left travelers sleepless and terrified. As explorers pressed forward, the forest grew stranger. Tree bark blackened like burned wood. Sap glistened like oil. Fresh claw marks streaked across the trunks, still wet and unmistakably violent. Something watched from the unseen places, patient and curious, not hunting, but studying, as though trying to understand the fear it caused. Episode 3. The Wilderness that Arie and Miabirras. The forest's facade of tranquility dissolved the moment the canopy closed overhead. The silence felt engineered, crafted to isolate and unsettle. It was the kind of quiet that suggested something waiting just out of sight. Locals whispered legends of the missing, hikers, hunters, entire groups swallowed by the woods. Their last transmissions described silhouettes packing the tree line, their movements jerky and unnatural. Nights were brutal. The cold pierced straight through clothing and skin. Even the strongest fire flickered weakly, as if the flames were suffocating. Footsteps, whispers, scratching, sounds arrived from every direction, none belonging to anything the survivors could see. Navigation became impossible. Trails buckled into new shapes, with paths merging or dissolving into nothing. Compasses spun uselessly. It felt less like being lost and more like being guided. Those who lived long enough to escape recounted hearing their own names murmured from above. Soft voices. Too soft, too precise. The forest's inner regions were unrecognizable, trees coated in tar-like sap, roots twisted like skeletal hands, and deep gouges carved fresh into the wood. Something prowled these depths, something intelligent. Fear here wasn't a reaction. It was a constant companion, as if some unseen presence observed every heartbeat with scientific interest. Episode 4. The Wilderness that Arie and Miabirras. The forest always appeared harmless from afar, but once inside, that illusion fell apart immediately. A pressure built in the atmosphere, demanding silence, demanding respect. Villagers recounted chilling tales of watchers in the darkness, figures that moved like shadows wearing human shapes. Some crawled, some stood impossibly still, all of them observed. When night fell, the wilderness grew predatory. Breath hung in the air, frozen. Fires barely glowed. Travelers clutched their blankets while every noise, every crunch of snow, every rustle felt personal, targeted. Paths twisted unnaturally. New clearings appeared where none existed before. Old routes vanished. The forest thrummed with intent, as if shifting its body around the intruders. Sleep offered no safety. Whispers wound their way through branches, repeating names with chilling tenderness. Hearing one's own name spoken from nowhere carved terror into the mind. Farther inside, the forest grew monstrous. Trees were blackened, dripping heavy streams of sap. Claw marks tore through the bark in thick, wet lines. The feeling of being watched grew unbearable. Not the gaze of a predator, but the scrutiny of a researcher. The forest was learning its victims. Episode 5. The Wilderness that Arie and Miabirras. The peaceful appearance of the woods was the first lie. Once beneath the canopy, visitors felt the weight of something ancient and aware pressing down on their shoulders. Warnings from locals spoke of disappearances, not just deaths but erasures. People simply stopped existing, leaving behind messages about the things watching them. Tall figures, bent figures, crawling figures, none fully human. As night descended, the temperature dropped violently. Fires suffocated before they could take shape. The darkness swallowed sound, amplifying even the smallest motion until it felt like someone or something was only steps away. Directions became meaningless. The forest rearranged itself with fluid certainty, pulling travelers deeper into its heart. Maps, compasses, instincts, none of it mattered. Whispers haunted the sleepless. They mimicked familiar voices. They pronounced names perfectly, too perfectly. The inner forest was a graveyard of unnatural growth. Bark charred black, sap thick like tar, gashes carved freshly into the wood as though by claws far too large to belong to any animal here. The dread that settled upon explorers felt studied, calculated. Observing fear seemed to be the forest's purpose. Episode 6. The Wilderness that Arie and Miabirras. The forest had a way of pretending to be harmless at first glance, but its deception never lasted long. Once inside, travelers felt the unmistakable sensation of trespassing into a place that did not tolerate strangers. Those who knew the land warned of silent figures patrolling the tree line, shapes that borrowed human outlines but moved with a stiffness that betrayed something else beneath the skin. Some stalked upright. Others scurried low, their limbs contorted. At night, the wilderness became something entirely different. Frost crept across sleeping bags. Fires sputtered out as though devoured by the cold itself. The slightest crack of a branch felt intentional, as if the forest announced its awareness with every sound. Paths wound into impossible patterns, looping and twisting as if the land were reshaping itself in real time. The ground seemed to forget the footprints left only minutes earlier. Whispers drifted through the canopy, calling out names with eerie gentleness. The voices were soft, familiar, and far too accurate echoes of memories the forest should not have possessed. Deeper inside, the trees transformed into grotesque monuments. Bark turned obsidian black, sap thickened into tar, and claw marks sliced fresh wounds into the trunks. The forest watched, not hungrily, but curiously, examining the fear it created as though fear itself were a language it wished to learn. Episode 7. The Wilderness that Arie and Miabirras. Peace was an illusion here. The moment the canopy swallowed the light, the woods shifted into a place of old intelligence and colder intentions. Local legends spoke of wanderers who vanished after describing pale silhouettes drifting between the trees. These figures didn't walk, they glided, twitching as if held by invisible strings. Nightfall brought an unnatural chill. Even layered clothing felt useless. Fires struggled for life, collapsing under an unseen pressure. The darkness pulsed, reacting to movement like a living organism. Navigation collapsed soon after entering. Trails bent into spirals. Landmarks repeated in impossible patterns. The forest didn't trap with brute force, it confused, corralled, and guided. Survivors recalled the moment the whispers began, soft voices murmuring their names, stretching the syllables like they were tasting them. The whispers always came from above, always from the trees. Further in, the forest took on a nightmarish anatomy. Roots snaked above ground like exposed veins, and the trunks bore long, wet fissures that were unmistakably fresh. Fear settled into the mind like fog, and with each step it felt as though someone, or something, walked beside the travelers, just out of sight, learning the rhythm of their breath. Episode 8, The Wilderness that Arie and Miabirras. From a distance, the wilderness looked ancient and silent, but within its borders it felt disturbingly alive. The air clung to the skin, thick with unspoken warnings. Villagers muttered about watchers, entities with hollow eyes that shimmered faintly in the dark. Their bodies bent at impossible angles. Their footsteps never matched their movements. When darkness fell, the forest exhaled cold. Flames recoiled, shrinking to embers. Sound traveled strangely, too close, too sharp, too deliberate. Trails dissolved behind travelers, leaving no trace of the path taken. Compasses trembled. Even the wind seemed uncertain of its direction. Whispers eventually found those who wandered too far. They spoke names with unsettling intimacy, stretching the vowels until they sounded inhuman. The voices weren't echoes, they were directed. Venturing deeper meant entering a world twisted by something ancient. Blackened bark wept thick sap. Trees leaned unnaturally, as though listening. Gouges carved into their trunks glistened like fresh wounds. The forest didn't simply observe, it mirrored the fear it found, mimicking breaths, footsteps, even heartbeats. It learned quickly, too quickly. Episode 9, The Wilderness that Arie and Miabirras. The forest welcomed no one, though it pretended otherwise. Its beauty from afar was merely a mask stretched over something old and restless. Local tailies described beings that prowled the woods, creatures shaped vaguely like humans, but with movements that betrayed a predator studying its prey. They hid behind the thinnest shadows, watching without blinking. Nights were merciless. Cold gnawed through bone. Fires flickered desperately, unable to compete with the suffocating stillness. Every noise felt engineered to unsettle, a footstep without a body, breathing without lungs. Paths melted into one another. Forest openings appeared where none existed before, while familiar spaces vanished completely. It was as if the land shifted like a massive, silent machine. Survivors recounted the same terror, voices whispering their names from impossible distances, mimicking loved ones, coaxing them deeper into the dark. Within the depths, the forest mutated. Trees stood like black pillars, dripping pitch. Massive claw marks tore through them as though the wood were no stronger than flesh. Fear wasn't merely felt, it was extracted, examined. Something in the forest treated emotions like artifacts, collected and catalogued with careful curiosity. Episode 10, The Wilderness that Arie and Miabirras. By the time explorers reached the forest's edge, it was already too late. The trees had chosen them. The canopy closed like the lid of a coffin, blotting out the sky. Those who lived nearby spoke little, but their silence carried warnings. They knew the figures that lingered between the trunks, long-limbed shapes that mimicked human posture, though poorly, like puppets imitating their masters. Night took on a predatory intelligence. The air thinned. Breath crystallized instantly. Fires suffocated under a pressure that felt deliberate, as if the forest wished for darkness. Trails contorted into unfamiliar forms, creating pathways that led only deeper. Landmarks moved. Shadows stretched too far. Even time felt distorted. Then came the whispers, soft, rhythmic, confident. They spoke names with a precision that suggested the forest knew more than it should. These voices weren't meant to frighten. They were invitations. In the belly of the forest, nature twisted into something horrifyingly sentient. Trees bled tar. Their roots curled like skeletal fingers. The claw marks embedded in their trunks seemed almost ceremonial. The dread that accompanied travelers was absolute. It was not the fear of being hunted. It was the realization that they were being studied, closely, patiently, as though the forest were deciding what to do with them.